My name is Sophia Hayes, I am 29 years old, and the day my grandfather's will was read was the day my parents looked me straight in the eyes and tried to erase me. I was sitting at a long polished table with my hands folded so tightly my knuckles had gone white, while my sister sat across from me in a designer dress, smiling like she already owned the room. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading what my parents proudly called the main part of the will, and that was when my mother leaned forward with fake sweetness and announced that my sister would be receiving $15 million from my grandfather's estate. My father slid a thick stack of documents toward her as everyone around the table murmured congratulations like this was some fairy tale ending. Then he looked at me, no folder, no check, not even a gesture, just a bored shrug as he said, "Your sister gets 15 million. As for you, Sophia, you can earn your own. Grandpa didn't want you to have anything." My mother nodded and added that he was done with me, that I had chosen my career over family, and that this was exactly what he wanted. The room felt like it tilted, but I didn't argue or cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I just stared at the table and listened as they rewrote the story of a man who had once been my biggest supporter. That was the exact moment my grandfather's own lawyer pushed his chair back, stood up, and calmly said there was a second document sealed and hidden that my parents had never been allowed to see, a document meant to be read only when everyone was present, especially me. I remember wondering if you've ever sat there while your own family decided you were worth nothing and questioned whether to walk away or stay for the one secret that could destroy everything, because what happened next was the reason my mother ended up screaming in front of everyone. Daniel Park, my grandfather's attorney, didn't flinch when my mother snapped that there was no second document. He simply adjusted his glasses, pulled a thick sealed envelope from his briefcase, and placed it on the table like a bomb. He said calmly that Arthur Hayes had given explicit instructions for this codicil to remain confidential from everyone, including his son, until the will was read with all immediate family present, especially his granddaughter Sophia. My mother's face drained of color while my father tried to laugh it off, saying Grandpa must have been confused near the end and there was no need to read anything else. Daniel ignored him, broke the seal, unfolded several pages covered in my grandfather's careful handwriting and legal print, and as my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear, the words finally cut through as if the room had gone silent. To my granddaughter Sophia Hayes, he read, "I leave full controlling interest in HarborMind Analytics, the company I have quietly built and invested in over the last several years, along with my personal investment accounts associated with it, held separately from my joint accounts with my son." Daniel explained that HarborMind was not some small side project but a fast-growing tech company based in Atlanta, built around an AI platform helping small businesses manage inventory, cash flow, and marketing decisions, already holding partnerships, contracts, and real revenue, and worth far more than the 15 million my parents had just handed to my sister. My father finally stopped smirking and blurted out that it was impossible, claiming Grandpa barely knew how to use a phone and could not have built a tech company, but Daniel looked straight at him and said that with respect, he learned, sought outside expertise, invested in the right people, and insisted everything tied to HarborMind remained solely in his name so there would be no confusion about his intentions. My mother leaned forward sharply, insisting he was not in his right mind, that he was old, sick, forgetting things, and that he had been told I wanted nothing to do with him. But Daniel's expression tightened as he lowered his eyes and continued reading that my grandfather was fully aware Mark and Linda had kept Sophia away from him by changing plans, telling him she was too busy, and telling her he was too tired or confused to see her, claiming she was ashamed of the family and did not care. Something he never believed. He wrote that he had seen her messages disappear, had his calls redirected, and watched them place Chloe in front of him with cameras and smiles while telling him Sophia wanted nothing to do with an old man, and my throat closed as I remembered all the texts that went unanswered, the calls that went straight to voicemail, and the excuses my mother gave every time I tried to come home. Daniel continued, reading that my grandfather had also noticed large transfers from his joint accounts into personal cards and accounts controlled by my parents, used to fund travel, vehicles, and lifestyle expenses primarily for Chloe, transfers that were never discussed with him, and when he questioned them, he was told he had already approved everything even when he had not, ending with the line that he may be old but he was not stupid. My mother jumped to her feet so fast her chair screeched across the floor as she shouted that it was a lie, that he signed everything and they took care of him, doing everything for him, while pointing at me and accusing me of abandoning the family for some computer dream, and my father tried to recover with a calmer tone, claiming his father wrote those words under pressure, had moments of paranoia, and that people get suspicious near the end. Daniel didn't move, his voice never rose, but every word landed heavy as he said, "Mr. Hayes, this codicil was drafted and signed in my office with full medical clearance from Arthur's physician confirming he was completely competent, and I am prepared to present those records if necessary." Across the table, Chloe's mascara had started to streak as she clutched the folder holding her 15 million like it might vanish if she let go, and she snapped that so what, he just gives Sophia some random company and leaves them looking like thieves, claiming she took care of him, she was there, she posted about him, and people loved their videos. Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit because I had been edited out of my own grandfather's life while she turned him into content, and I stared at Daniel hoping there was more, needing proof that I hadn't imagined every email, every call, every attempt. Daniel sighed, glanced at the final page, then looked back at my parents and said Arthur knew there would be pushback, he anticipated they would question his memory, his capacity, and his decisions, which was why he left further instructions and additional evidence to be presented if this went to court. My mother's hands were shaking now as she grabbed my father's arm and hissed for him to do something, insisting they couldn't let this stand and that Arthur couldn't just rewrite everything they had agreed on, but for the first time my dad had no quick answer, just staring at the papers like he was finally doing the math and realizing too late that it no longer favored him. As I sat there listening, pieces in my head began snapping into place, the missed holidays, the last-minute cancelled visits, the way my parents always insisted on handling the banking to make things easier, the way Chloe flaunted trips and designer bags without a real job to explain them. Maybe you think you would have screamed or flipped the table or stormed out, but all I did was sit a little straighter and wait, because one question burned in my mind, if this was only the beginning of what Grandpa had hidden from them, what else was about to surface that they couldn't talk their way out of? When Daniel said my grandfather had watched my messages disappear, something snapped loose in my memory and suddenly I wasn't in that conference room anymore. I was back in Savannah, sweating through my t-shirt on the front porch while Chloe twirled in a brand new dance costume in the driveway as my mom filmed her, shouting for another spin because followers loved that, while my dad loaded suitcases into the trunk for a weekend trip to Orlando and I stood there at 14 holding a flyer for a summer coding camp at the community college. When I tried to hand it to my mom, she barely glanced at it and said it was too expensive, maybe next year. Besides I spent enough time on the computer and should go outside or something, shoving the flyer back into my hands like junk mail. That was always the pattern, money for Chloe's dance competitions, her ring light, her brand, another pair of limited edition sneakers because they looked good on camera, while for me it was always maybe later, maybe next year, maybe when things were less tight, even though things never seemed tight when it came to her. At school it played out the same way, teachers gushing about Chloe's stage presence and confidence, then shifting tone when they reached my name, calling me bright but too quiet, hiding behind projects, while my mom joked that I'd marry my laptop if I could and my dad added they were working on getting me out of my shell like I needed fixing. The first person who ever invested in me was my grandfather Arthur, who showed up one afternoon in his old pickup with a beat-up laptop he bought from a closing office supply store, slow and ugly and perfect. Telling me with a wink that the processor was old but that just meant it already had stories and could help me write mine. He set it on the kitchen table like it was glass while my mom muttered about screen time and Grandpa ignored her, bringing me books instead of candy, Intro to Python, data analysis for small business owners, Excel for dummies which he found hilarious, sitting with me at that same table reading aloud and asking me to explain loops, data sets, and what it meant to clean data, then peering over his glasses and asking in plain English how it would help someone running a store like his. My parents rolled their eyes whenever they passed, my mom saying I'd never use it in real life and at least Chloe's dancing gave her presence that mattered. One night Chloe was trying on sequined outfits for a video while my mom zipped her up and praised her, and I walked in excited holding a printout of a chart I'd made showing how Grandpa's store could save money by reordering certain items monthly instead of weekly, but my dad glanced at it for half a second and dismissed it as pretend math from a teenager, Chloe laughed and called it a nerd attack, and went back to posing. Grandpa didn't laugh though. The next day he took me to his store, walked me down the aisles, asked me to show him again, and listened between paint cans and power tools like I was a consultant, patting my head afterward and telling me I saw patterns others missed. When I was 17, I entered a local hackathon on a whim and built a crude dashboard to track seasonal sales for a hardware store, basic and messy but functional, and I stood on that stage in a thrift store blazer scanning the crowd for my parents who promised they'd come, only to hear my grandfather cheering louder than anyone when my name was called. He hugged me afterward and told me I'd built something useful, that helping one store could lead to helping hundreds. Dragging me to the judges to explain it again while my parents texted me a picture of Chloe at the mall with new shoes and an apology we never made up for. That dynamic never changed. Chloe's milestones came with celebrations, mine with a quick good job, while Grandpa kept asking what-if questions about tools for small shops, sitting at the counter with his ledger open and thinking like an owner. My parents said I was weird and too intense. Chloe said I'd end up alone with screens no one liked, but Grandpa said I'd change how people ran their businesses and talked about partners and platforms like it was inevitable. Sitting back in that conference room years later, hearing Daniel read about disappearing messages and stolen money, I realized the only person who ever truly saw value in me knew long before I did that the rest of my family never would, and maybe that was why he built Harbormind in secret and tied it to my name. When the memories faded, I was back at the table with everyone staring at me like evidence instead of family, and I finally spoke, saying they told him I wanted nothing to do with him, that he was too tired and confused to see me, while my mom crossed her arms and insisted I didn't know what it was like day to day. I reminded her of the Christmas I bought a last-minute ticket home only to be stopped on the driveway and told he was in a facility, later learning he'd been home all week, and my dad claimed they were following doctor's advice. Stress wasn't good for him. Funny, I said quietly, how he had energy for all those videos Chloe posted, and when Chloe snapped that those videos made him happy and loved, Daniel turned to her and calmly asked whether Arthur ever knew she was being compensated for brand deals tied to those posts. Her face flushed as she deflected, saying she was building her career and that Mom and Dad said Grandpa wanted to help, throwing a desperate look at them as if realizing she might be standing alone. I swallowed and asked about the emails, the ones I sent asking to visit. The times I offered to bring my laptop and show him what I was working on, you replied from his account, Mom, writing, Grandpa is proud of you, but he doesn't really understand that kind of stuff, sweetheart. Just focus on your own life. My mother slammed her palm on the table. So now it's a crime to protect an old man's peace, she shouted. You didn't see him crying when you chose Chicago instead of law school here. You didn't hear him say he didn't recognize you anymore. Daniel calmly cleared his throat. For what it's worth, he said, Arthur never told me he didn't recognize you, Sophia. What he told me, very clearly, was that he felt his relationship with you was being managed for him. My dad scoffed. Managed is what you do for an elderly parent, he said. Draft enough wills and you'll see it. They get paranoid. They imagine conspiracies. They start thinking everyone is stealing from them. Daniel quietly set the papers down and reached into his briefcase again. This time he pulled out a small black flash drive and placed it on the table between us. Arthur thought you might say that, he replied, which is why he asked me to record a video when we prepared this codicil. It's dated, time-stamped, and supported by a statement from his physician. If you intend to suggest incompetence, you should see what that actually looks like. My mother's hand shot out. You are not playing some edited clip to smear us, she hissed. Turn that thing off. Daniel didn't even look at her. He plugged the drive into the slim laptop the paralegal had brought in, turned the screen so everyone could see, and clicked play. My grandfather's face filled the screen, older and thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were clear. He sat in the same conference room we were in now, wearing a neatly pressed button-down, his hands folded loosely in his lap. All right, Arthur. A younger version of Daniel's voice said off camera. In your own words, tell us why you're here. Grandpa took a slow breath. My name is Arthur Hayes, he said. I am choosing to change my will because I have become aware that my son and his wife have been using my trust in ways I never approved. Money has left my accounts without my consent. And when I ask questions, I'm told I'm confused. He looked straight into the camera. I am not confused. I am old, but I know what I earned, and I know who I want it to go to. My dad muttered something under his breath, but no one stopped the video. Grandpa went on. I love all my grandchildren. But only one of them thinks the way I do. Sophia understands numbers. She understands systems. She built something on her computer that helped a small shop like mine, and she never once bragged about it. He chuckled softly. Mark never listened when I talked business. Linda loves appearances. But Sophie listens. My chest tightened. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until the room started to spin. On the screen, Grandpa's expression darkened. I've also seen how they keep her away from me, he said. Visits cancelled. Calls dropped. I'm told she's too busy with her big city job. Then I hear from Ruth that Sophia drives all the way here and my son sends her home from the driveway. His voice hardened. I know what that is. That's control. That's fear that the two of us will talk and compare stories. He shifted in his chair, anger flashing across his face in a way I had rarely seen. If you're watching this, it means you're contesting my decision. It means you're once again trying to take what doesn't belong to you. So let me be clear. Harbormind Analytics, every share, every related account, goes to Sophia. Not because she's my favorite, but because she's the only one who can use it for what it was meant to do. He paused, his eyes shining. To help the little guys. People running shops like I did, who never had access to these tools. Daniel's voice returned on the recording. Arthur, are you making this decision under pressure from anyone? Grandpa looked at him like the question offended him. The only pressure I feel is time, he snapped. I'm making this choice now while I still can, because I know if I wait, they'll convince a doctor I'm senile and have me sign whatever they put in front of me. I want this on record before that happens. The screen froze on his face, then went black. No one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner and Chloe's uneven breathing. My mother's mascara had fully surrendered, black streaks cutting down her cheeks. She looked at my father like he was supposed to fix this, find some legal loophole or clever line to undo what we'd just seen. He stared at the blank screen, his fingers drumming a frantic rhythm on the table. You can take it to court, he said finally, his voice tight, but it doesn't change the years we spent taking care of him. A jury will see that. They'll see what we sacrificed. Daniel closed the laptop with a soft click. You're free to challenge the will, he said. If you do, the video, the financial records, and the physician's statement regarding Arthur's capacity will become part of the public record. His gaze flicked briefly to Chloe, whose influencer life depended on public image. And given the nature of the transfers we've documented, there may be questions that go beyond probate court. That was the moment my father's fingers stopped tapping. The moment my mother stopped shouting. And the moment I realized this wasn't just about who got what. This was the beginning of something much bigger. And for once, they were the ones who should be afraid of what came next. The fight my parents promised never turned into some dramatic jury trial with tearful witnesses. Once Daniel filed the codicil, along with the video and the bank records, their bluff collapsed under the weight of numbers they couldn't charm or cry their way around. There were meetings, of course. They hired a lawyer who walked into the first conference room loud and confident, shaking hands too hard, assuring them everything was negotiable. He walked out after the first disclosure hearing looking like he needed a strong drink and a different client. The court appointed a forensic accountant to review years of transactions tied to my grandfather's accounts, and every family expense that had quietly funded Chloe's brand and my parents' lifestyle began showing up in spreadsheets and exhibits instead of Instagram stories. The judge didn't care how many videos Chloe had posted holding Grandpa's hand or how many heartfelt captions she'd written about cherishing moments. He cared about the power of attorney my father used to move money out of those accounts for vague personal expenses. He cared about the timing of the transfers, right before luxury vacations, right before a new SUV, right before Chloe's sponsored trips that somehow ended up partly funded by Grandpa's money. He cared that when Arthur questioned those withdrawals, emails mysteriously disappeared. When their lawyer tried to argue that Arthur had verbally approved everything, Daniel slid the video across the table, and the judge watched my grandfather look straight into the camera and say, "I've seen money leave my accounts that I never agreed to. When I ask questions, I'm told I'm confused. I am not confused." After that, there wasn't much room left to spin the truth. The medical report confirmed Arthur had been evaluated as fully competent when he changed his will. The accountant's report laid out the misuse of funds in cold columns that didn't care about anyone's feelings. The court validated the codicil and confirmed HarborMind analytics, and all related accounts were mine, exactly as Arthur intended. On top of that, the judge ordered my parents to repay everything they had taken from the joint accounts, plus interest and penalties. They didn't have it. They had lived like the money would never end. To even begin paying it back, they had to sell the big Savannah house with the white columns and perfect lawn my mother loved posing in front of for holiday photos, the house she once called our legacy. They sold the 2 high-end cars they liked to park in the driveway just to be seen, the same ones Chloe used as props in her day-in-the-life vlogs. Word spread, because it always does. Small towns are efficient and cruel that way. The neighbors who once praised Linda's taste in decor started whispering in grocery store aisles about financial abuse and mismanaged funds. People who used to envy them crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Mark was placed on leave at the logistics company pending review, and it didn't take long for that to turn into termination for cause. No company wanted a CFO whose father's estate was now a public record of misconduct. Chloe's fall was quiet and loud at the same time. Quiet in the way doors closed behind the scenes, loud in the way screenshots and clips started circulating online. People went back through her old videos and noticed how Grandpa sometimes looked off camera, distracted, uncomfortable. A former friend leaked messages where Chloe bragged that she was set for life because her parents were making sure the will worked in her favor. Brands that once sent free clothes and checks now sent carefully worded emails mentioning reputational risk and choosing a different direction. Her follower count dipped, then slid, then dropped fast. Comments under old posts shifted from heart emojis to questions she couldn't delete quickly enough. She posted a tearful video about misunderstandings and online hate, but without glossy trips and endless luxury backdrops. The algorithm moved on, and so did her audience. While all of that unfolded, I was signing papers in a different courthouse room, papers that formally separated my financial life from theirs. No more shared anything. No emergency contacts with their numbers. No backdoor access to accounts for safekeeping. Danielle slid the final form toward me and said, "Once you sign this, they have no legal claim to HarborMind or anything that comes from it. Not now. Not ever." My hand shook for a moment, not from doubt, but from the weight of cutting the last invisible cord. Then I signed, and for the first time, their disappointment could no longer cost me money or freedom. I moved into a modest apartment in Atlanta, close to where HarborMind's small team worked out of a rented office that still smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. Grandma Ruth refused to stay in the Savannah house while it was being stripped for sale, so she packed her life into 2 suitcases and came with me, her photo album stacked on top of my boxes of cables and old notebooks. She left the expensive furniture behind and took only the framed photo of her and Arthur on the day the store opened. My parents, stripped of the image they'd spent years carefully crafting, slipped out of town not long after the sale closed. Through distant relatives and the occasional social media slip, I heard they ended up in a small rental in Nevada, chasing lower rent and anonymity. No more charity galas. No more club memberships. No more glossy Christmas cards. They didn't call. They didn't text. If they spoke about me at all, it wasn't to me. And for the first time, the silence between us was something I chose, not something they controlled. One of the last days before Ruth and I left Savannah, I walked through the empty house alone. My footsteps echoed wrong in rooms that once overflowed with decorations and noise. I stood in the doorway of the den where I'd sat on the floor with that beat-up laptop while Grandpa leaned over my shoulder asking what all those numbers meant. I could almost hear his voice, low and amused, saying, "Show me how this helps a guy like me, Sophie." Without the furniture and framed illusions, the house felt hollow, like a stage after the show ends, props gone, audience home. Whatever performance my parents had been putting on there was over. The real legacy Arthur left wasn't the wood and plaster they were losing. It was the code, the company, and the certainty that I would never again have to beg to be valued. He had spent those same years using his mind to build a future for me. In the end, their image collapsed. His future stood. For years later, if you had walked into Harbormind's office in downtown Atlanta, you would never have guessed it started as a side project on a beat-up laptop and a promise tucked inside a will that almost got buried. We had glass doors now, a clean logo on the wall, and a team of 50 engineers, analysts, and support staff who spent their days building tools for people who looked a lot more like my grandfather than my parents' country club friends. Our platform helped small hardware stores, bakeries, barber shops, corner bodegas, you name it, track inventory, forecast demand, and finally understand which products actually made them money. When storms were coming, Harbormind could tell a tiny coastal shop exactly how many generators to stock. When a bakery needed to know which cupcakes to stop making, our dashboards answered in plain language, not corporate jargon. Every time a client called and said, "We didn't go under this quarter because of your software," I heard my grandfather's voice saying, "Help the little guys." We hosted free workshops twice a month, inviting local business owners into our office, feeding them pizza, and walking them through their numbers in a way no bank ever had. I set up a scholarship fund in Arthur's name for students from working-class families who wanted to study data or computer science. And every year, we handed out refurbished laptops like the one he'd bought me, except these actually booted up in under 10 minutes. Chloe reached out in the second year after the will reading. It came as a long email that sat unread in my inbox for weeks. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for a shout-out. She wrote about how her follower count had collapsed, how sponsorships dried up, how she'd gone from brand trips and first-class flights to clocking in at a small marketing agency where no one cared how many likes she used to get, only whether she met deadlines. She said she'd started volunteering at a community center, teaching teenage girls basic content creation, but also talking to them about contracts and not turning their lives into products. She admitted she'd been jealous of me for years, that watching Grandpa look at me the way he never looked at her felt like an open wound. She didn't excuse what she did. She just said she was sorry. I called her. The conversation was awkward, full of pauses and nervous laughter, but we talked, not as influencer and invisible sister, but as two women who had finally run out of people telling them who to be. We weren't close, not yet, but the door was cracked open instead of bolted shut. My parents never reached out. Through Grandma Ruth and the occasional relative, I heard updates. Mark picked up a basic bookkeeping job for a small firm out west, nowhere near the executive title he used to brag about. Linda stayed home mostly, rarely posting online anymore. The glamorous life replaced with discount furniture and generic coffee. They went from being the couple everyone envied to the couple people lowered their voices to talk about. Ruth and I built a quiet rhythm in Atlanta. She claimed the sunny corner of my living room for her rocking chair and knitting. Every evening, we sat on the balcony with takeout, watching the city lights blink on. Sometimes she told me stories about Arthur in the early days, when he was just a kid stocking shelves long before he owned anything. Other times, we sat in comfortable silence, the kind you only get with someone who's seen you at your lowest and never tried to edit you. People like to say success is the best revenge. Maybe it is. But sitting there with my grandmother, knowing Harbormind was giving families like ours a real chance without anyone needing to steal or lie to make it happen, I realized something else. The real revenge wasn't the money, or the growth charts, or the press articles. It was knowing the part of me my parents dismissed as useless, the girl with the pointless computer obsession, was the part that built a life they could no longer touch. The first time I told the whole story out loud to strangers was on a stage in New York, standing under a red circle of light with cameras pointed at my face and the word TED glowing behind me. My palms were sweating around the clicker, but my voice stayed steady when I started the way it all began for me. At my grandfather's will reading, my parents gave my sister $15 million and told me to earn my own. They said Grandpa didn't want me. They were wrong. The audience laughed in the right places and went silent in the heavy ones as I walked them through it. Not every messy detail, but enough. How my family decided I was the difficult one, the strange one, the one who didn't fit the image they wanted to post. How my grandfather quietly bet everything on the part of me they tried to erase. How greed and manipulation almost buried that bet for good. And how, in the end, the future they tried to deny me was the one that stood. I talked about the small-town shops now using our tools, about the bakery owner who cried on a Zoom call because she thought she was about to lose the business her mother started and then didn't. I put up a slide showing my grandfather's handwriting, his notes about helping the little guys, and felt something in my chest loosen that had been tight for years. When I finished and the applause washed over me, it didn't feel like revenge or victory, it felt like confirmation that his belief in me had landed somewhere real. Later that night, back in my apartment, I kicked off the heels, peeled off the blazer, and sat on the edge of my bed with the one thing from Grandpa I carry everywhere now, his old wristwatch. The leather band is cracked, the face scratched, worn thin by years of use, but if you pop the back open there's a tiny photo tucked inside, me at 17 standing next to my hackathon project, hair frizzing out everywhere, grinning like an idiot. Around the metal he had paid someone to engrave one sentence, for the granddaughter they never understood, but I always believed in. I ran my thumb over the words until they blurred. For a long time I thought winning meant forcing my parents to admit they were wrong, making them choke on their doubts. But somewhere between the courtroom and that stage, I realized that was never the point. The point was that I stopped auditioning for people who had already decided not to see me. The point was that I took the love and belief I got from one old man and multiplied it, turning it into jobs, scholarships, and second chances for people who came from families a lot like mine. If there's any lesson in what happened, it's this: being the unwanted child does not mean you are unworthy. Most of the time, it just means the people around you are too afraid or too small to handle who you really are. You do not have to stay in rooms where your value is up for debate. You are allowed to build new rooms with new people who don't need to be convinced you matter. And if you've ever been the Sophia in your family, the one overlooked, blamed, or quietly cut out, I hope you remember this part more than the money or the scandal. One person believing in you at the right time can change everything. Be open to finding that person, and when you can, be that person for someone else. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe for more real stories, and comment which city you're watching from.